4chan is an anonymous image board website that has profoundly influenced internet culture while also courting immense controversy. Launched in 2003 by a 15-year-old student, Christopher Moot Poole, it began as a small forum for sharing Japanese anime images. Over the years, 4chan evolved into a hub of internet subculture, giving birth to countless memes and even the hacktivist collective Anonymous, all under the cloak of near-total anonymity. At the same time, its lax moderation and anything-goes ethos have made it a breeding ground for pranks, edgy humor, and sometimes extreme or unlawful content. Despite, or because of, its chaotic reputation, 4chan today attracts an estimated 20 million monthly visitors and remains an active community more than 2 decades after its creation. This is the entire history of 4chan, from its humble origins and early wild days to its growth, cultural impact, scandals, and the present day, presented in a calm and comprehensive narrative. Relax and get comfortable as we journey through the story of 4chan. We'll explore how a scrappy anonymous forum started by a teenager became a cornerstone of online culture, all in a soothing tone that you can fall asleep to. By the end, you'll have a thorough understanding of 4chan's timeline, its influential moments, and its legacy, with factual details drawn from deep research along the way. Let's begin at the beginning. Origins, Japanese image boards, and something awful. To understand 4chan's birth, we must first look at its inspirations. In the early 2000s, Christopher Poole was an active participant on the forums of Something Awful, SA, a popular comedy site with a vibrant community. SA's forums were heavily moderated and notably dismissive of derivative internet jokes or memes. At the same time, Poole, under his online nickname Moot, was fascinated by the anonymous culture of Japanese message boards. One such board was 2channel, Touch, a massive text board run by Hiroyuki Nishimura, where all users posted without names. Another was Futaba Channel, 2chan, a Japanese image board that allowed users to share images, particularly centered on anime and manga. These Japanese boards had a freewheeling, no-identity atmosphere that was very different from the login-required, rules-heavy forums like Something Awful. Young Poole saw an opportunity to combine these worlds. He wanted a place with the niche anime content of 2chan, but the tight-knit community spirit of Something Awful. In his own words, he aimed to combine 2chan's anime culture with SA's community. Thus, in the summer of 2003, the 15-year-old high schooler began quietly working on creating an English-language image board. Moot obtained open-source code from Futaba Channel, 2chan, and translated its interface from Japanese to English, using Babelfish, a rudimentary translation tool of the time. Because the name 3chan was already taken, he cheekily went one number higher, and 4chan was born. Founding of 4chan, 2003. On October 1, 2003, Christopher Poole launched 4chan on the domain 4chan.net, inviting users from SA's anime forum to check it out. At the start, 4chan was a tiny site running off Poole's home computer equipment and a borrowed web server. The site was modeled directly after the Japanese 2chan, with a simple text and image posting system and complete anonymity. There were no user accounts or login, and anyone could post without revealing a name. The content also mirrored 2chan's focus: anime images and discussion. In fact, when 4chan first went live, it only had one forum board, labeled B Anime Random, intended for anime-related posts and other random topics. Essentially, B was the catch-all board for anything goes, similar to 2chan's random board, Futaba's Nijiura. User interest grew quickly. By the end of 2003, Moot expanded the site by adding several new boards dedicated to specific anime and manga genres. For example, A, anime, C, anime cute, H, hentai, D, hentai, alternative, EBU, wallpapers, and Y, yaoi, were all launched in the last months of 2003. This early expansion set the pattern for 4chan's board system, each board focusing on a topic or genre, some work-safe, suitable for all ages, and others NSFW, not safe for work, often containing adult content. Notably, one of these early additions was L. Lolicon, a board for certain explicit anime art, but it was short-lived. In 2004, after some users posted illegal content, real child pornography, which is strictly forbidden, the L board was swiftly shut down under threat of legal action. This was an early lesson that even on an anything goes site, there were boundaries set by law. In its first few months, 4chan was very much an underground experiment run by a teenager out of his bedroom. It was free to use and had no advertisements. Pool funded the servers out of pocket and with help from a few volunteers. Very soon, he ran into financial and technical hurdles. In February 2004, the site's original web host, GoDaddy, suspended the 4chan.net domain due to complaints, likely related to content or bandwidth abuse. Scrambling to keep the community alive, Pool migrated 4chan to a new domain, 4chan.org, which remains its address to this day. Only weeks later, Pool nearly had to shut 4chan down due to running out of money. On March 1, 2004, he posted a message saying he couldn't afford that month's server bill. In response, the users, fiercely loyal even in those early days, flooded him with donations, enough to pay the bills and keep 4chan online. This set a precedent. 4chan's users would repeatedly come together to support the site financially when needed, almost like passing a digital collection plate. It also underscored that from the start, 4chan was not a lucrative enterprise. It was run more out of passion and community than profit, something that would challenge Moot for years to come. The Wild Early Years, B, and the Birth of a Culture, 2004 to 2006. As 4chan stabilized through 2004, its user base expanded beyond anime enthusiasts. The B board, the random forum, became the beating heart of 4chan's culture. On BE, almost anything was allowed. There were no usernames, no enduring reputations, and, initially, very few rules. Users reveled in the freedom to post outrageous, bizarre, or humorous content without censorship. Nick Douglas of Gawker once summarized BE as a board where people try to shock, entertain, and coax free porn from each other. The community embraced a kind of chaotic, juvenile humor that outsiders often found incomprehensible or offensive. Inside jokes and bizarre memes proliferated, creating a barrier of weirdness that both bonded 4chaners and repelled newcomers. Users on B even affectionately referred to one another as B-tards, combining B with the insult retard, and liberally used tongue-in-cheek slurs like adding B-fag to any identity, e.g. calling someone a new fag for being new. Everything was done, as they said, for the lulz, for laughs and mischief, often at someone else's expense. This period saw the birth of many memes and traditions. In 2005-2006, 4chan users popularized image macros and jokes that would later spread across the internet. For example, the silly humor of posting cats with captions, later globally known as LOL cats, was a staple on 4chan. Users called it Catterday, spending Saturdays sharing funny cat pictures. The classic meme of a prank web link to Rick Astley's Never Gonna Give You Up music video, known as Rickrolling, also first gained traction among the 4chan crowd. Other early 4chan-born memes included the likes of the ORLI, Owl, Mudkips, and the Long Cat, Tac Null duo. Memes that might seem nonsensical, but became cultural currency on the board. The site's anonymity and ephemeral posting, threads disappear if they aren't active, encouraged throwaway gags and rapid meme evolution. In fact, the meme-producing power of 4chan was so notable that Encyclopedia Britannica credits 4chan with popularizing the image macro format and being the source of some of the internet's most enduring memes. But 4chan's early culture wasn't just silly images. It also had a darker, transgressive edge. Users relished in anonymously pulling pranks and raids on other websites. In these years, groups of users from B would occasionally organize invasions of other online communities, basically coordinating to flood another forum, chat, or game with disruptive posts as a practical joke. For instance, in the summer of 2006, B users famously raided the kids' social game Habbo Hotel. They created avatars of a specific appearance, a black-suited afro-haired character, and swarmed Habbo's virtual pool areas, declaring the pool closed due to AIDS, a tasteless joke referencing an internet meme. This Habbo raid became legendary in 4chan lore and spawned the catchphrase "Pools Closed," accompanied by an image of a grinning man in a suit, a meme representation of the raiders. At the time, these raids were seen by participants as harmless trolling or a form of collective play, though to outsiders, they ranged from absurd to outright offensive. The Habbo Hotel incident, and other raids around that time, prompted Moot to institute one of 4chan's first major rule changes. By late 2006, a new rule was added site-wide banning the organization of invasions or raids on other websites. This was a pivotal moment. It showed that even in BE, absolute chaos had limits, especially when 4chan's actions started to cause real grief for outsiders. The No Invasions rule joined a very short list of global rules, the others being obvious bans on things like child pornography and anything else explicitly illegal. Other than that, however, BE remained a lawless realm. As Christopher Poole once described it, the power lies in the community to dictate its own standards. The moderators mostly stepped in only for the worst offenses, leaving the tone and content of B up to its users' collective ID. By the mid-2000s, 4chan's anarchic spirit and steady growth were drawing increasing attention, both good and bad. In 2005, it was reported that 4chan had about 70,000 visitors a day, showing that it was no longer an obscure secret. People were flocking to B for its unfiltered content and unpredictability. Some users described browsing B as addictive. You never knew what you might see next, from hilarious brilliance to disturbing shock images. Media outlets began taking note of this strange corner of the web. Some journalists lauded 4chan as a breeding ground for creativity and memes, while others condemned it as a den of offensive juvenility. In 2008, The Guardian memorably called the 4chan community lunatic, juvenile, brilliant, ridiculous, and alarming, all at once. This colorful description captures how outsiders struggled to categorize 4chan. Was it a cradle of internet creativity or a gathering of troublemakers? The answer, perhaps, was both. The rise of anonymous and early exploits, 2007 to 2008. As 4chan's user base grew, something intriguing happened. The collective identity of anonymous began to solidify. Because everyone posted without a name by default, users often referred to the collective mass of posters simply as anonymous, or jokingly, the anonymous hive mind. In a sense, anonymous was just a default label, but around 2007, it started to mean something more. The users of AB began to realize they could act together outside the confines of their own board. This led to a series of pranks and actions that spilled into the real world and other parts of the internet, and anonymous became the banner under which they operated. One of the first notable appearances of anonymous in mainstream media was tied to a rather grim incident. In July 2007, Fox News aired an alarmist segment about 4chan, painting it as a gathering ground for hackers and malcontents. The report infamously dubbed Anonymous, and by extension 4chan users, as an internet hate machine, warning of a shadowy collective of pranksters and hackers who could target anyone online. The Fox News piece exaggerated and vilified the group, but ironically, it only boosted Anonymous's notoriety and in-jokes. 4chaners gleefully embraced the over-the-top label of internet hate machine, turning it into yet another meme and even printing it on t-shirts. It was a case of 4chan appropriating an insult as a badge of honor. Meanwhile, more high-profile pranks continued. 4chan users targeted white supremacist radio host Hal Turner in 2006-07 with prank phone calls and fax spams, costing him money. And they bombarded the website of joke-stealing aggregator eBombs World in retaliation for content theft. These incidents were still fundamentally pranks, disruptive and often vulgar, but done for the lulz. In January 2008, the anonymous movement leapt from mischief to activism with Project Chanology, an organized campaign against the Church of Scientology. The spark came when a video of Tom Cruise enthusiastically praising Scientology leaked online. The church attempted to suppress the video by legal means. In response, users on 4chan's B board, as well as related Chan forums, organized under the anonymous moniker to oppose Scientology's perceived censorship. First came online attacks. They DDoSed Scientology websites, flooding them with traffic to knock them offline, and performed Google bombs so that searching dangerous cult would list Scientology's site. Then Anonymous took things into the offline world. On February 10, 2008, hundreds of Anons in Guy Fawkes masks, a symbol lifted from the film V for Vendetta, protested peacefully outside Scientology centers in cities around the globe. This coordinated day of protest grabbed headlines worldwide. The idea that an internet message board's anonymous users could mobilize in person was unprecedented. A YouTube video titled Message to Scientology, issued by Anonymous as a manifesto, garnered millions of views. The media, struggling for words, often simply called the organizers the hacker group Anonymous, linking them back to 4chan. The Guardian described how a maverick band of hackers, under the name Anonymous, had launched an online war against Scientology, and noted how the movement grew from typical hacking pranks into real-life protests with a broad base of support. This moment, Anonymous versus Scientology, marked 4chan's transition into mainstream public consciousness. It was now clear that the anonymous masses of 4chan had power beyond inside jokes. They could unite for a cause, even if part serious, part satirical. Indeed, Encyclopedia Britannica later noted that 4chan's B board served as a birthplace of the hacktivist group Anonymous. After 2008, Anonymous would go on to engage in many other operations and evolve separately as a decentralized activist collective. But its cultural roots stayed tied to 4chan's ethos of anonymity and chaos. It wasn't all grand causes, though. Alongside episodes like Project Chanology, 4chan in 2008 was still stirring up internet culture in lighter ways. This was the golden era of meme factories on the site. A silly example. In mid-2008, 4chan users orchestrated the rise of Rickrolling into a global phenomenon. Tricking people into clicking a disguised link to Rick Astley's music video became an international prank. 4chan also popularized the Chocolate Rain meme, a viral song by Tay Zonday, and the spread of Advice Animals meme templates, which later flourished on other sites. The site's user community was so engaged that they even obsessively tracked post numbers to celebrate dubs or gets, special post IDs with repeating digits. There was competition to hit notable milestones, like the 1 millionth post or amusing sequences of numbers. Achieving a legendary get, say post number 1, Karn on 4chan, was a point of pride, celebrated with screenshots and copy pastas. This quirky numeric culture underscored how active the boards had become. By mid-2008, B was getting an estimated 150,000 to 200,000 posts per day, according to Moot's own estimate. The frenetic activity meant inside jokes evolved rapidly, and yesterday's meme was quickly old news, a dynamic that made lurking on B equal parts exciting and bewildering. Mainstream spotlight, from Internet Hate Machine to Time's Most Influential, 2008-2010. As 4chan's notoriety spread, traditional media continued to report on its antics with a mix of alarm and fascination. We've seen how Fox News sensationalized it in 2007. By 2008, other outlets were exploring the phenomenon more deeply. The Los Angeles Times noted in 2008 that 4chan had become one of the busiest image boards on the Internet. Journalists marveled at how a site with no registration, no archives, and no rules was spawning so much of Internet culture. The New York Times ran a piece describing B as akin to a high school bathroom stall or an obscene telephone party line, highlighting the crude and lawless vibe. In one oft-quoted line, the Baltimore City paper wrote that, "In the high school of the Internet, B is the kid with a collection of butterfly knives and a locker full of porn," capturing the sense that B was the unpredictable troublemaker of the online world. Amid this infamy, the 4chan community pulled off one of its most audacious hacks on popular culture in 2009. Time magazine ran an online poll in 2009 to determine the world's most influential person. Thanks to an organized campaign by 4chan users, especially denizens of B.A.N., Christopher Moot Poole, the very creator of 4chan, won the top spot, beating out the likes of Barack Obama, Oprah Winfrey, and Vladimir Putin. In the poll results, Moot was listed as 2008's most influential person with over 16.7 million votes. Of course, it didn't take long for Time and the public to realize the poll had been rigged for the lulz. 4chan users had crafted scripts to automate voting and ensure Moot's victory. In a cherry on top, the first letters of the top 21 names on the poll's leaderboard were arranged to spell out a hidden message. Marble cake, also the game. A nonsensical phrase referencing a prank chat room and an old 4chan inside joke about the game. This acrostic Easter egg confirmed that the voting manipulation was deliberate and coordinated. When the stunt was revealed, many observers chuckled at the sheer brazenness and absurdity of it. Moot himself was amused. Time magazine, while putting him on their website's cover for that issue, acknowledged the prank. The incident solidified 4chan's rep as the Internet's chief merry pranksters, capable of hijacking even a time poll for a joke. It also gave Moot, who had been very private about his identity until then, a sudden dose of public fame. The Wall Street Journal had revealed his real name in 2008, and now with the time poll, Christopher Poole stepped further into the limelight, albeit somewhat reluctantly. Interestingly, around this same period, Moot spoke publicly about the philosophy behind 4chan's anonymity. In February 2010, he gave a talk at the TED conference extolling the value of anonymity online. He positioned himself as a sort of foil to Facebook's Mark Zuckerberg. Whereas Zuckerberg argued for real-name identity on the web, Poole defended the radical opacity of anonymous forums. He noted that forcing people to attach permanent identities to everything they say can stifle authenticity and creativity, whereas anonymity can free people to express themselves or collaborate in unique ways. This was a kind of ethos that underpinned 4chan's existence and its contributions, and admittedly, its problems. The TED Talk and subsequent interviews showed that Moot, now in his early 20s, was grappling with 4chan's growing influence and infamy, and trying to articulate its positive side. He pointed out, for example, that 4chan was like a collective organism, the name Anonymous itself implying an anonymized collective rather than a single person. Journalists described him as the anti-Mark Zuckerberg, championing an opposite vision of the Internet. Yet, even as Moot philosophized, the chaos continued. In September 2008, 4chan briefly went offline due to a severe DDoS, distributed denial of service attack, possibly retaliation from someone 4chan had antagonized. Poole quipped on his blog afterward, "We now join the ranks of MasterCard, Visa, PayPal, et al., an exclusive club," comparing 4chan, tongue-in-cheek, to major companies targeted by hackers. It was a light-hearted acknowledgement that 4chan had itself become a target at times, a consequence of being so notorious. In 2010, another strange incident underscored 4chan's entanglement with real-world mischief, Sarah Palin's email hack. Back in September 2008, during the U.S. presidential campaign, a college student had gained unauthorized access to Republican VP candidate Sarah Palin's private Yahoo email and posted some details on 4chan's B-board. This led to a high-profile FBI investigation and the student's arrest. In April 2010, during the trial of the hacker, David Kernell, Moot was called as a witness for the prosecution. In court, he had to soberly explain to a judge and jury the meaning of terms like BEOP, original poster, and lurker, as they related to the 4chan screenshots presented in evidence. The image of Christopher Poole, clean-cut and polite, translating 4chan's lingo in a courtroom, was almost comical, but it demonstrated how far 4chan's influence reached. Even a U.S. federal trial had to wade into B territory. Moot's testimony provided a rare moment of 4chan officially entering the legal record and showed that by 2010, the site's activities had real-world repercussions, both benign and criminal. By the end of the decade, 2000s, 4chan had firmly established itself as a double-edged force on the internet. It was at once the source of viral internet memes and creativity, the id of the internet, as some called it, and a hotbed of controversy and deliberate offensiveness. Its model of anonymity and ephemerality was unique and influential. Other sites took inspiration. For instance, 8chan, created in 2013, and various spin-off image boards sought to replicate 4chan's free speech ethos, often with even fewer rules. Meanwhile, mainstream platforms like Reddit grew much larger by offering some similar features: topic-based boards, but generally with accounts and upvote systems. Still, 4chan maintained a distinct identity and a loyal user base drawn to its particular brand of unfiltered conversation. As the 2010s began, 4chan would face new challenges: how to deal with ever-increasing traffic, how to handle harmful content, and what to do as its founder began to feel the weight of running this beast for so long. Expansion and upheaval. New boards, new challenges. 2011, 2013. In the early 2010s, 4chan continued to expand its roster of boards and adapt to its growing, changing community. Christopher Poole, Moot, was now an experienced admin in his mid-20s, and he sometimes made controversial moderation decisions that drew backlash from users. One notable shakeup came in January 2011. Poole deleted 2 boards, R9KWA and Manu, which ignited an uproar among some users. The R9KWA board, Robot 9000, had been an experimental forum where an automated script prevented people from reposting any text that had been posted before to encourage original content. Moot felt R9K had outlived this experimental purpose. It was originally a test of a concept from the webcomic XKCD. More significantly, he deleted /new, which was the news board, because it had devolved into a hotbed of racist discussions rather than actual news sharing. The removal of new was effectively an acknowledgement that simply having a current events board had attracted a lot of hateful political commentary that was hard to manage. The user backlash was intense. People do not like their favorite boards being taken away. Recognizing the discontent, Moot reversed course later that year. In October 2011, he restored R9K and even brought back a form of the news board under a new name: Paul/Politically Incorrect. The creation of Paul in 2011 is a significant milestone in 4chan's history. It was essentially the rebranded reboot of the old new board, but with an explicit label, Politically Incorrect, that served as both a warning and an embrace of the kind of content expected there. The idea was that Paul/ would be a place specifically for the often extreme, controversial, or fringe political discussions that had overwhelmed the previous news board, thereby keeping them contained away from other parts of 4chan. Indeed, Paul/ quickly became a haven for far-right rhetoric, conspiracy theories, and provocative political memes, as Britannica notes. More on Paul's impact in a moment. Alongside Paul, Moot introduced some other boards in 2011 to address community demand. For example, SOC, short for social, was launched as a space for off-topic personal posts, things like rate my looks threads, share your webcam, or regional meetups, which had been cluttering B.O. By carving these out into SOC, B could focus a bit more on its core chaotic content. The early 2010s also saw boards like MLP, My Little Pony, created in 2012, after a surge of brony. My Little Pony fandom started flooding unrelated boards. Moot responded by giving the pony fans their own home, MLP, and even instituting a new global rule: no pony content outside MLP, to quarantine that trend. This may seem comical, but it reflects how 4chan's culture kept fragmenting into niche interests. Whenever one subculture, be it political junkies, or My Little Pony fans, or fitness buffs, etc., grew big enough, a new board would spawn to house it. By mid-2012, 4chan's homepage listed dozens of boards, about 50 plus, each its own micro-community. These ranged from KE, weapons, to fitness, to TG, tabletop games, and beyond. Yet, B remained the most trafficked by far. At one point in 2009, it accounted for 30% of all 4chan traffic, and B still defined the site's overall reputation. Meanwhile, Moot struggled with technical and financial pressures. The site by 2011 was getting hundreds of millions of page views per month. With no user accounts and tons of image uploads, it was resource-intensive. Advertising was hard to come by, since many companies were wary of associating with 4chan's oft NSFW or controversial content. Poole tried various ways to keep 4chan solvent. He implemented ad banners where possible, notably using ad providers that wouldn't flee at the first sight of adult content. He also introduced the 4chan Pass, a paid subscription that let users bypass CAPTCHA verifications when posting, as a minor revenue stream. Nonetheless, it was often a shoestring operation. At one point in early 2009, Poole confessed he was $20,000 in debt from running 4chan, even after signing a new ad deal. The community's donations helped at times, but sustaining a big website on goodwill was not easy. This constant stress on Moot, as the sole admin operator, would eventually wear him down. Despite the challenges, 4chan kept influencing wider internet trends during these years. The site's music board, #MU, for example, gained a reputation around 2010 to 2012 for discovering and hyping obscure music. Bands and genres got unexpected boosts from Muse obsessive discussions. The brony subculture, adult fans of My Little Pony, Friendship is Magic, had some roots on 4chan before they were shunned to MLP, demonstrating how 4chan incubated even the unlikeliest of fan groups. Another notable pop culture moment. In 2011, the singer Taylor Swift held an online contest for schools to win a visit, and 4chan users tried to prank the vote to send her to perform at a school for the deaf. The prank was foiled, but again made news. And in an odd blending of 4chan culture with mainstream culture, in 2011, the site's #X paranormal board was frequently visited by a celebrity. The model Tyra Banks had a TV show episode about creepy internet stuff and apparently browsed #X out of curiosity. These little anecdotes show that by the early 2010s, 4chan was woven into the fabric of internet pop culture, even if many people didn't use it directly. Amidst all this, Moot himself was diversifying his efforts. In 2010, he raised venture capital to start a new site called Canvas. Canvas, launched in 2011, was almost the polar opposite of 4chan. It encouraged users to post images, but with registered usernames, and even to log in via Facebook. The idea was to create a meme-sharing community that was a bit more civil and palatable to advertisers, perhaps taking what he learned from 4chan, but shedding the darker aspects. Despite raising around $625,000 from investors, Canvas never took off like 4chan did. It had a small user base that overlapped somewhat with the 4chan crowd, but many 4chaners were uninterested in anything that required logging in. Moot tried a spin-off app called DrawQuest in 2013, but by early 2014 he announced Canvas and DrawQuest were shutting down. This failure hit Moot personally and financially, but also reinforced how unique 4chan's community was. It couldn't be easily replicated in a sanitized form. The anonymity and culture of 4chan were a double-edged sword that gave it life. Back on 4chan, a quiet but important development took place in September 2012. 4chan began using the Cloudflare service to mitigate frequent DDoS attacks and improve reliability. There was also a full code upgrade to HTML5 around then, modernizing the site's underpinnings. These behind-the-scenes improvements helped the site handle traffic and uptime better. Still, for the average user, 4chan in 2013 looked and felt much like it always had. A simple image board interface with threads and replies scrolling off into oblivion once they ran their course. Scandals rocked the community. The Fappening and Gamergate, 2014. The year 2014 proved to be one of the most tumultuous in 4chan's history, bringing both a deluge of unwanted attention and deep internal strife. Two major controversies, one involving stolen celebrity photos, and the other a bitter war over video games and harassment, both intersected with 4chan's users and ultimately pushed Christopher Poole to a breaking point. The first incident was dubbed the Fappening, a crude portmanteau referring to a massive leak of private celebrity nude photos. In late August and early September 2014, hundreds of intimate photos of famous actresses, models, and athletes, including Jennifer Lawrence, Kate Upton, and many others, were leaked online by hackers. These images, stolen from personal iCloud accounts, initially appeared on 4chan, specifically on the BE board, where anonymous users shared and spread them. The leaks quickly spread beyond 4chan to Imgur, Reddit, and the wider web, but 4chan was widely reported as the site where Jennifer Lawrence's hacked photos were leaked. This put 4chan under an intense media spotlight, and not in a flattering way. The public was appalled at the flagrant violation of privacy, and by extension, at 4chan's role in disseminating the stolen images. While 4chan's moderators did try to delete outright illegal content, some images of underage individuals, the site's culture of anonymity and lack of registration made it a natural initial dumping ground for the hackers. The Vox News site wrote that the hacks were a reminder of the huge influence 4chan still wields more than a decade after its creation. Noting that despite its underground vibe, 4chan remained a central hub for breaking, if illicit, content and memes. No sooner had that storm begun to settle than Gamergate exploded. Gamergate started around August 2014 as a so-called controversy over ethics in video game journalism, but it quickly became clear it was largely a harassment campaign targeting female game developers and critics. The movement coalesced on Twitter and forums like 4chan's Video Games Board. People using the hashtag #Gamergate rallied around grievances against certain game journalists and feminist critics, but this often devolved into doxing, publishing personal info, and issuing vile threats, including death and rape threats, against women in the gaming industry. On 4chan, discussion about Gamergate grew frenzied, especially on VU and related boards. However, Gamergate's tactics clearly violated 4chan's rules. Remember, Moot had rules against doxing and raids, and threats of violence are illegal. Thus, in September 2014, Christopher Poole made a crucial decision. 4chan banned Gamergate discussions and content on the site. He cited the rules. The movement was promoting coordinated harassment and the posting of personal information, which 4chan could not tolerate. This decision was hugely controversial among many 4chan users. Gamergate supporters on 4chan felt betrayed by Moot, accusing him of censorship or of taking sides against them. Moot later reflected that September 2014 was probably the most stressful month of his life. Indeed, he was juggling the fallout from the celebrity photo leaks and the civil war over Gamergate simultaneously. "Week after week, there's this new controversy," he said, describing how he kept getting pulled back in to put out fires. When he banned Gamergate, parts of the 4chan community turned against their founder, bombarding him with abuse. Gamergate participants, now exiled from 4chan, largely migrated to alternative platforms, notably to 8chan, a newer image board that welcomed them with open arms and had even fewer rules. In fact, 8chan's creator Frederick Brennan credited the Gamergate exile for a huge surge in 8chan's traffic and prominence. It was a stark illustration that if 4chan tried to enforce any boundaries, those users who craved total free reign would just go somewhere else. For Moot, this was a personally disillusioning period. Since founding 4chan as a high schooler, he had spent 11+ years at its helm, moderating, coding, and keeping the servers running into his adulthood. And despite 4chan's massive traffic, 20 million visitors per month, as he noted, it had never been a massive financial success. By late 2014, he was exhausted, battling relentless controversies, and realizing that running 4chan had consumed his youth. He even mentioned to Rolling Stone that Gamergate's upheaval finally gave him the resolve to step away. He had contemplated leaving for at least a year prior, but the events of 2014 cemented his decision. In an emotional Q&A session on 4chan in January 2015, Christopher "Moot" Poole announced that he would be stepping down as the site's administrator. It was the end of an era. The founder of 4chan, at age 26, was retiring from the community he built. Poole did one last Q&A with users 2 days after the announcement, then said his farewells. He handed day-to-day control to a handful of longtime volunteer moderators while he sought a more permanent solution for 4chan's leadership. Many users responded with an outpouring of nostalgia and respect, posting thank yous to Moot for creating something that had changed their lives, for better or worse. Others were skeptical about 4chan's future without its original captain. Some had even celebratory tones if they disagreed with his handling of things like Gamergate. But overall, it was a significant moment in Internet history. Moot, one of the most influential figures of the Internet's youth culture, even if largely behind the scenes, was moving on. New ownership and a new chapter, 2015. After Moot's departure, there was uncertainty about who would take over 4chan and how the site would sustain itself. This question was answered a few months later. In September 2015, it was announced that Hiroyuki Nishimura, the very creator of Japan's 2-channel image board that had originally inspired 4chan, was purchasing 4chan and becoming its new owner and administrator. The news was both shocking and strangely poetic. Nishimura was something of an internet icon himself. He had founded 2channel, a text board, in 1999 and overseen its explosive growth in Japan. However, by 2014, he had lost control of 2channel, amid some legal troubles and internal disputes. When 4chan users heard "Hiroyuki Nishimura is our new owner," reactions were mixed. Some were excited that an experienced image board pioneer was at the helm, while others were wary, recalling rumors that Nishimura had a history of selling user data or had scammed users on Twitch for profit. There were indeed controversies. Nishimura had been accused of monetizing 2channel's data and was ousted by a business partner in 2014. On September 21, 2015, 4chan's homepage bulletin confirmed the transfer of ownership, greeting users with, "4chan is now owned and led by Hiroyuki Nishimura, the founder of the largest anonymous BBS in Japan, 2channel." Nishimura himself jumped in with enthusiasm. The very next day, he hosted an Ask Me Anything AMA-style Q&A session on 4chan's QA board to introduce himself. This Q&A was memorable for its chaotic charm. Nishimura, not being a fluent English speaker, answered hundreds of user questions in somewhat broken English, but with earnestness and humor. He responded to serious queries, troll posts, and nonsensical questions alike, often giving unintentionally funny answers due to language gaps. Users found his candor and slight naivete endearing. Many began affectionately calling him Hero or jokingly Gook Moot, an offensive pun combining a slur with moot since he was the new moot. In that marathon Q&A, Hiroyuki revealed a few interesting things. He mentioned he had met Moot back in 2011 and that Moot had told him of wanting to retire. He said he borrowed money to buy 4chan. Later it was revealed the price was about $8 million, partly financed by Nishimura and partly by a Japanese toy company seeking a stake. He floated ideas like adding a search function to 4chan, worrying about the lack of advertisements, and even wanting to put a little picture in the site's header logo. Crucially, he assured users that he intended to be as hands-off an admin as possible, letting 4chan's culture continue organically. Given 4chan's fiercely self-governing user base, this likely came as a relief. Following the Nishimura takeover, there was a sense of cautious optimism. The transition had been smooth on the surface. The site didn't go down, moderators remained in place, and rules stayed mostly the same. Nishimura engaged directly with users on a few occasions, often leading to comedic misunderstandings, but generally positive vibes. On the technical side, he made some back-end changes and continued incremental improvements, like fixing some of the catalog and archive issues. Financially, Nishimura's purchase injected needed funds, and he sought ways to increase revenue, such as courting Japanese advertisers or partnerships, with mixed results. Notably, under Nishimura, 4chan briefly experimented with splitting into two domains: 4chan.org for Not Safe for Work boards, and 4channel.org for Safe for Work boards, in an attempt to attract mainstream advertisers to the cleaner section of the site. This happened in 2018. Interestingly, all boards were later merged back under 4chan.org by late 2023. Through late 2015 and into 2016, 4chan continued chugging along, though not without incidents. In October 2015, on 4chan's 12th birthday, a grim event underscored the site's ongoing association with violence. A troubled young man who was a frequent poster on the HR9K board committed a mass shooting at Umpqua Community College in Oregon, killing 9 people, plus himself. It was reported that shortly before the attack, someone had posted on 4chan's R9K essentially warning people in the Northwest U.S. not to go to school that day, which many interpreted as the shooter's anonymous hint at his plans. This cast 4chan in an extremely negative light in news coverage, as people asked whether the site bred violent inclinations or why users didn't alert authorities. In truth, it was difficult to trace an anonymous warning, and many 4chaners initially thought it was a tasteless joke rather than a credible threat. Nonetheless, the incident added to 4chan's infamous rap sheet. Meanwhile, the newly formed Paul board was becoming one of 4chan's most active and infamous communities. By 2015 to 2016, Paul was a major center of the rising alt-right internet culture, pumping out edgy memes, racist or nationalist propaganda, and conspiracy theories. A remarkable and disturbing example was the birth of the Pizzagate conspiracy in 2016. In the lead-up to the U.S. presidential election that year, some Paul users concocted a wild theory that a Washington, D.C. pizza restaurant, Comet Ping Pong, was the hub of a child trafficking ring involving top Democrats. This completely baseless theory spread from 4chan to social media. In December 2016, it culminated in a real-world incident. A man believing in Pizzagate walked into Comet Ping Pong with a rifle and fired shots, attempting to self-investigate the non-existent basement dungeon. Fortunately, no one was hurt before he surrendered to police. But it was another jaw-dropping example of a 4chan-born idea translating into actual danger. Britannica notes that the armed intruder was sentenced to 4 years in prison, and a copycat arson attempt happened in 2019 by another believer, all from a conspiracy theory brewed on Paul. A year later, in October 2017, yet another conspiracy began on 4chan's Paul / that would grow even larger: QAnon. On October 28, 2017, an anonymous user signed as Q, claiming to have Q-level top-secret clearance, posted a series of cryptic messages on Paul, suggesting that Hillary Clinton was about to be arrested and that a vast secret war against evil was underway behind the scenes. These posts, which came to be called Q-drops, spun a narrative that President Trump was secretly working to dismantle a cabal of global elites involved in heinous crimes, and that this user Q had insider knowledge. Initially, many on 4chan assumed this was just another role-playing long con or trolling experiment. Such hoaxes were not uncommon on Paul Baoguan. However, the Q messages tapped into the fertile soil of existing conspiracy communities and began to gain traction outside 4chan. By 2018, QAnon had spread to Reddit, YouTube, and Facebook, attracting a huge following of believers. Notably, early Q drops on 4chan recycled elements of Pizzagate and other far-right conspiracy tropes. Researchers later determined that the original Q was likely a small group of individuals on 4chan, possibly including a South African 4chan moderator and later the owners of 8chan, who took turns posting as Q. After a few months, Q's posts moved from 4chan to 8chan, where the board owner Jim Watkins and his son could have more control, and indeed Watkins is suspected of later taking over the Q persona. Regardless of who was behind it, by 2020, QAnon had grown into a global phenomenon and even influenced political discourse, with adherents running for office and joining real-life protests. It all began as just another anonymous post on 4chan, a testament to how ideas incubated in the chans could escape into the wider world with dramatic effects. Throughout these developments, Nishimura's administration of 4chan largely maintained the status quo of the site. He did not make radical changes to moderation. Indeed, as of 2024, Outside observers noted that 4chan's moderation still mainly focuses only on clearly illegal content, like child pornography, and everything else remains untouched. In other words, the hands-off approach continued. Users on Paul and elsewhere were free to post pretty much any kind of political propaganda, hate speech, or false information, just as before. This kept 4chan as controversial as ever. It also mirrored Nishimura's own laissez-faire style from his 2-channel days. Legacy and the current state of 4chan, 2018-2025. As we arrive in the present day, 4chan persists as one of the Internet's longest-running and most impactful community forums. It's remarkable to consider that October 2023 marked 4chan's 20th anniversary, 2 decades of continuous operation since that modest launch in 2003. The site that began with a handful of anime image threads has now generated well over 2 billion posts across dozens of boards in its lifetime. It has outlived numerous competitors and clones, and has weathered scandals that might have sunk a less resilient community. What does 4chan look like today? In many ways, it's unchanged at its core. The site interface is still simple. Anonymous posting is still the norm, and new memes and inside jokes still churn out of the primordial soup of Paul, and other boards daily. There are around 70 to 80 active boards at any given time, spanning topics from technology, to cooking, to niche interest boards like Toys, or VP, Pokemon. Some boards have come and gone. For instance, 4chan briefly experimented with a news board again and split off some international boards that later merged back. But the big hitters remain. Is still the anything-goes chaos zone. Paul is unfortunately well known as an aggregator of extremist discourse. Boards like anime, and video games, continue to be major hubs for their fandoms, and newer additions like business and finance, which became a hotspot for cryptocurrency discussions in recent years, have gained popularity. Culturally, 4chan's influence is both more diffuse and more pervasive than ever. On one hand, much of mainstream meme culture has moved to platforms like Twitter, TikTok, and Reddit. The average internet user might not visit 4chan, but they regularly consume content that originated from 4chan's creative or devious minds. For example, the widespread Pepe the Frog meme, which became appropriated as a political symbol, was popularized on 4chan's boards. Terms like creepypasta, for horror legends, or doing it for the lulz, entered pop culture via 4chan lexicon. Even the concept of the hacktivist anonymous mask-wearing figure, so ubiquitous in protest imagery now, comes straight from 4chan's anonymous roots. In recent years, 4chan's Paul/ was also ground zero for meme campaigns, like the satirical idea that 4chan users had weaponized Pepe and meme magic to help Donald Trump get elected in 2016, a kind of in-joke that then took on a life of its own outside the site. And incredibly, slogans and ideas from 4chan have echoed in real politics, from congresspeople inadvertently tweeting QAnon slogans, to foreign influence operations seeding disinformation on 4chan knowing it will spread. On the other hand, 4chan remains rightfully infamous for its toxic underside. The site is still frequently associated with hate speech, trolling, and the incubation of extremist thought. Several mass shooters in the late 2010s posted manifestos to 8chan, the spin-off site, and sometimes referenced 4chan memes or culture, which cast a grim shadow on the Chan world as a whole. In 2019, After tragedies like the Christchurch mosque shooting, where the killer live-streamed the attack and posted on 8chan's Glossage Paul, there were renewed calls to crack down on such forums. 8chan itself was forced offline for a while in 2019 when its service providers cut ties, and it later rebranded as 8kun. Through all this, 4chan, the older sibling, stayed online, perhaps benefiting from being seen as slightly less extreme than 8chan in some public narratives. But companies have occasionally acted against it. For instance, at one point, Google temporarily delisted 8chan from search results over child abuse content, and one could imagine 4chan would face similar exclusion if not moderated to baseline legality. In terms of management, Hiroyuki Nishimura continues to own 4chan as of 2025. He keeps a fairly low profile day to day. There was a period of intrigue in 2022-2023 when rumors swirled that Nishimura might sell 4chan, or that a group of 4chan moderators was trying to oust him, but nothing materialized publicly. Nishimura did face legal battles in Japan unrelated to 4chan, for example, over the ownership and data of 2channel, which he lost in court, and there were speculations about how that might affect 4chan. Internally, 4chan's volunteer moderators and janitors, junior mods, quietly continue the never-ending work of deleting illegal posts, like spam or explicit contraband, and banning rule breakers. There are only on the order of 20 or so active volunteer mods at a time, a surprisingly small team for a site of 20 million users, which partly explains why a lot slips through the cracks unless it's truly egregious. As one researcher observed, the only moderation on the platform appears to be for clearly illegal content. Everything else remains untouched. That essentially sums up 4chan's enduring philosophy of governance. As a final reflection, it's worth noting how 4chan's legacy has two very different sides. On the light side, it democratized online expression and spawned joyously creative phenomena. Many internet users have laughed at a meme born on 4chan without ever realizing its origin. The culture of remixing and anonymity allowed introverted or marginalized people to express themselves or be part of something big without fear of personal embarrassment, since there were no permanent usernames. Some even credit 4chan's anonymity with enabling more honest conversations in certain contexts. On the dark side, the same anonymity also provided cover for people to unleash their worst impulses, racism, misogyny, and cruelty, with little consequence, and to organize harassment campaigns targeting individuals, the human cost of which is very real. The lack of persistent identity also meant no long-term accountability or memory. As one early 4chan user famously put it, "None of us are as cruel as all of us." The mob mentality could take over, and empathy could get lost behind a veil of screen names. Today, 4chan stands as a kind of elder statesman of internet culture. 22 years old, older than some of its current users, and still stubbornly unique. It has inspired countless discussions in academic circles about online anonymity, free speech, and community dynamics. It has been the subject of books, such as It Came From Something Awful by Dale Barron, and countless news articles trying to explain what exactly is 4chan to the public. And the site's story isn't over. As of now, 2025, it continues to host over 900,000 new posts per day on average, a staggering amount of content that ranges from mundane to profound to disturbing. In closing, the history of 4chan is a microcosm of the Internet's own evolution. bursting with creativity and connectivity, yet shadowed by chaos and conflict. From a teenager's anime forum dream to an infamous cultural powerhouse, 4chan has traveled a long road. If you've made it this far, drifting in and out of sleep perhaps, you've heard how each chapter unfolded. The wild early pranks, the birth of Anonymous, the mainstream media panics, the meme revolutions, the internal dramas, and the ongoing saga of a digital community that just won't quit. Whether one views 4chan with admiration, disgust, or a bit of both, there's no denying its enduring impact on online culture. As you gently fade into sleep, remember, even in the quiet of night, somewhere on 4chan, a new thread is being born, an old meme is being reborn, and the wheel of internet lore continues to turn, anonymous, untamed, and unabashed, as it has since 2003. Sleep well, knowing you've journeyed through one of the internet's most extraordinary stories, the entire history of 4chan. And as 4chan users might say in parting, good night, Anonymous.